Chapter 29. "Now, who mid ye think I've heard news o' this morning?" said Dairyman Crick, as he sat down to breakfast next day, with a riddling gaze round the munching men and maids. "Now, just who mid ye think?" One guessed, and another guessed. Mrs. Crick did not guess, because she knew already. "Well," said the dairyman, "'tis that slack-twisted, bird of a fellow Jack Dollop. He's lately got married to a widow woman." "Not Jack Dollop? A villain to think of that," said a milker. The name entered quickly into Tess Durbeyfield's consciousness, for it was the name of the lover who had wronged his sweetheart, and had afterwards been so roughly used by the young woman's mother in the butter churn. "And has he married the valiant matron's daughter, as he promised?" asked Angel Clare absently, as he turned over the newspaper he was reading at the little table, to which he was always banished by Mrs. Crick in her sense of his gentility. "Not he, sir. Never meant to," replied the dairyman. "As I say, 'tis a widow woman, and she had money, it seems, £50 a year or so, and that was all he was after. They were married in a great hurry, and then she told him that by marrying she had lost her £50 a year. Just fancy the state of my gentleman's mind at the news. Never such a cat and dog life as they've been leading ever since. Serves him well, be right, but unlucky the poor woman gets the worst on't." "Well, the silly body should have told him sooner that the ghost of her first man would trouble him," said Mrs. Crick. "Ay, ay," responded the dairyman indecisively. "Still, you can see exactly how 'twas. She wanted a home, and didn't like to run the risk of losing him. Don't ye think that was something like it, maidens?" He glanced toward the row of girls. "She ought to told him just before they went out to church, when he could hardly have backed out," exclaimed Marian. "Yes, she ought," agreed Iz. "She must have seen what he was after, and should have refused him," said Retty spasmodically. "And what do you say, my dear?" asked the dairyman of Tess. "I think she ought to have told him the true state of things, or else refused him. I don't know," replied Tess, the bread and butter choking her. "Be cussed if I'd done either on't," said Beck Nibbs, a married helper from one of the cottages. "All's fair in love and war. I'd ha' married en just as she did, and if he'd ha' said 2 words to me about not telling him beforehand anything whatsomever about my first chap that I hadn't choose to tell, I'd ha' knocked him down wi' a rolling pin. A scram little fellow like he, any woman could do it." The laughter which followed this sally was supplemented only by a sorry smile, for form's sake, from Tess. What was comedy to them was tragedy to her, and she could hardly bear the mirth. She soon rose from table, and, with an impression that Clare would follow her, went along a little wriggling path, now stepping to one side of the irrigating channels, and now to the other, till she stood by the main stream of the Var. Men had been cutting the water weeds higher up the river, and masses of them were floating past her, moving islands of green crowfoot, whereupon she might almost have ridden, long locks of which weed had lodged against the piles driven to keep the cows from crossing. Yes, there was the pain of it, this question of a woman telling her story. The heaviest of crosses to herself seemed but amusement to others. It was as if people should laugh at martyrdom. "Tessie!" came from behind her, and Clare sprang across the gully, alighting beside her feet. "My wife soon?" "No, no, I cannot. For your sake, oh, Mr. Clare, for your sake I say no." "Tess!" "Still I say no," she repeated. Not expecting this, he had put his arm lightly round her waist the moment after speaking, beneath her hanging tail of hair. The younger dairymaids, including Tess, breakfasted with their hair loose on Sunday mornings before building it up extra high for attending church, a style which they could not adopt when milking with their heads against the cows. If she had said yes instead of no, he would have kissed her. It had evidently been his intention, but her determined negative deterred his scrupulous heart. Their condition of domiciliary comradeship put her, as the woman, to such disadvantage by its enforced intercourse that he felt it unfair to her to exercise any pressure of blandishment which he might have honestly employed had she been better able to avoid him. He released her momentarily imprisoned waist, and withheld the kiss. It all turned on that release. What had given her strength to refuse him this time was solely the tale of the widow told by the dairyman, and that would have been overcome in another moment. But Angel said no more. His face was perplexed. He went away. Day after day they met, somewhat less constantly than before, and thus 2 or 3 weeks went by. The end of September drew near, and she could see in his eye that he might ask her again. His plan of procedure was different now, as though he had made up his mind that her negatives were after all only coyness and youth, startled by the novelty of the proposal. The fitful evasiveness of her manner when the subject was under discussion countenanced the idea, so he played a more coaxing game, and while never going beyond words or attempting the renewal of caresses, he did his utmost orally. In this way Clare persistently wooed her in undertones like that of the purling milk, at the cow's side, at skimmings, at butter-makings, at cheese-makings, among broody poultry, and among farrowing pigs, as no milkmaid was ever wooed before by such a man.